America, breaking news, terror in Charlottesville. Chaos in the streets as a car plows into a crowd of people.
Blood all over the ground, people screaming. I've never seen such a horrific, blatant racist attack in my entire life.
After clashes between white nationalists and counter-protesters, victims thrown in the air, one woman dead, others critically wounded.
It became a big doggone melee out here.
The alleged driver arrested. What we're learning about the suspect this morning, was he fueled by hate?
And fighting erupts on the streets of this American city, hate groups making Nazi salutes.
Please go home and never come back.
Skirmishing with counter-protesters, beating each other with clubs, kicking each other to the ground.
This is a battleground right now.
Police in riot gear out in full force.
Get out of the park!
Overnight, mourning two of their own. A police helicopter crashing.
And this morning, President Trump under fire.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides.
Taking heat for what he did not say. Even members of his own party speaking out. The fallout this morning.
From ABC News, live in New York, this is Good Morning America.
Good Sunday morning, everyone. Dan is off once again. It is great to have Matt Gutman with me once again on this very busy morning as we cover the chaos and violence in Charlottesville, Virginia that ended in tragedy.
This graphic image capturing the horror, showing a car ramming into a crowd of people. You see those bodies flying, a horrifying scene with deadly results.
Horrifying indeed. It capped a day of protests, white nationalists clashing with counter-protesters in scenes like this on the streets that erupted into pure chaos. The hate boiled over with the governor declaring a state of emergency, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions has opened a federal civil rights investigation.
Now, here's what we know. 3 people were killed. A 32-year-old woman who was hit by that car that plowed into the crowd, as well as 2 state troopers. In total, 35 people hurt. Police have arrested the alleged driver, 20-year-old James Fields Jr., from Ohio.
They're looking more at his motive, and we want you to take a look at the cover of the Daily Progress. It's the local newspaper covering Charlottesville with the headline, "A Day of Death."
And we have full team coverage of this story this morning, and we begin with Eva Pilgrim on the ground in Charlottesville. Good morning, Eva.
Guys, several people are still fighting for their lives this morning. Now the FBI is investigating the motive behind that deadly crash that killed one person here in Charlottesville. Panic and chaos, a car plowing through a crowd of people protesting against a white nationalist rally in Charlottesville. Go, 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 go! This morning, the suspected driver, 20-year-old James Alex Fields Jr., is behind bars. Authorities say Fields, a registered Republican, lives in Maumee, Ohio, almost 8.5 hours away. His mother telling the AP she knew her son was traveling to Virginia for a rally.
I didn't know it was white supremacists. I thought it had something to do with Trump. Trump's not a supremacist.
This video showing Fields under arrest shortly after the crash. It happened just before 2 p.m. Counter-protesters marching through downtown sent scrambling.
A car just plowed through hundreds of people downtown Charlottesville.
Here you can see the silver 2010 Dodge Challenger barreling down the hill toward a sea of targets with little time to react, slamming to a stop only after it hit a van and another car. Blocked in, that car shifting in reverse, screeching back down the street to get away.
Shoes all over the ground, pools of blood all over the ground, people screaming.
One person, a 32-year-old woman, left dead. 19 more rushed to the hospital, 5 in critical condition.
I can tell you that the injuries are ranging from life-threatening to minor at this point.
The destructive aftermath on the street, leaving bystanders searching for their loved ones.
I need my sister.
Others jumping in, carrying those hurt in the collision, desperately searching for help. This following nearly 24 hours of unrest.
White lives matter! White lives matter!
White nationalists stormed the University of Virginia's campus Friday night, protesting plans to remove a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee.
Blood and soil! Blood and soil!
The violence only escalating Saturday, chaos in the streets. as demonstrators clashed with counter-protesters, the governor declaring a state of emergency.
There is fighting happening in the streets.
Police using pepper spray. Then, the situation taking that deadly turn. You're so shaking.
I am. Coming down. I saw the car coming down the hill, throwing bodies over top of it until the car cleared and saw the smashed windshield. That's going to stay with me for a while.
And Fields was charged with second-degree murder as well as failing to stop at a deadly accident. He is being held without bond, guys.
Thanks, Eva. It's chilling to think that the damage to that car was caused by human bodies. And I want to ask you, after almost 18 hours of continuous violence Friday into Saturday, last night, surprisingly quiet.
Matt, it was quiet last night. Police were given extra powers and able to keep the peace. They were given the ability to enforce curfew, something they didn't need to do because it stayed quiet. But definitely here in town, you can feel and see the police presence. Paula?
Eva, we want to thank you for your reporting. And joining us now is John Ziegler. He's a self-described citizen journalist, was in Charlottesville covering the clashes. John, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me today.
And John, first and foremost, you saw that crash, but before it happened, can you describe to us how high were tensions at that moment?
I was with a buddy. We were on a rooftop trying to launch a drone. 10 minutes later, we saw a couple hundred counter-protesters gathering. So we decided, you know, we're here to get media, and that's what I live stream. That's what I'm here to do. So we went to go live stream the counter-protesters. They were getting ready to march peacefully. They had signs. They were chanting. They weren't chasing after any of the white nationalists. There were no white nationalists in the area. They were just going to march down the streets and get their message across to the city of Charlottesville. They got about 20, 30 feet down the road, and had I left 10 seconds earlier, I would have been in the path of that car myself. That's how close I was. I was starting to march with the crowd, and then, boom, the car plowed into at least like 4 people right off the bat that flew over his car. He hit a parked car, which then hit another parked car. The chain reaction of cars caused a lot more carnage to people.
People let the car in because they thought it was a cop car?
There were some witnesses, because after it happened, we did have a time we were talking to each other, looking at other people's video footage, trying to get the whole story of what happened. And we had some witnesses that were up at the front of the street where the car entered, saying that it was coming in slow. They thought it was a cop car because it had all tinted windows. They didn't see a license plate on the front of the car, so they kind of let it through and it was going slow, and then it slammed on the gas. And that was from their perspective at the end of the street.
How fast do you think the driver was going at that point? And he did stop and then back up and then ram the crowd again, correct?
Yes, I mean, I would say he was going at least 30 miles per hour, if not faster than that. And then when he backed up, I know he ran over another couple of people as he was backing up to get out of there. Another interesting piece, yesterday I overheard somebody else who was an eyewitness giving an interview to another media outlet, who was also at the area where the car first entered that street, and he said he saw that car waiting there for at least a couple minutes, observing the counter-protesters, trying to see which way they were going to march. And once he saw they were marching towards him, he stepped on the gas.
Lastly, what do you really want to hear from our country's leaders right now?
As horrendous as it is, this woman lost her life. But we need to take this moment and make something positive out of this and have these tough conversations in this country that this country has been unwilling to have. We've tried for years. Activists have been trying to have these conversations for years, and we're called violent. Just trying to get in the street because that's the only option we have to get our message out there.
All right.
So maybe now people will listen to what we've been trying to say.
All right, John, we want to thank you for your time. I know you're going on very little sleep, still in a state of shock this morning. Our thoughts are with you. Our thoughts are with everyone affected in Charlottesville. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paula. Joining us now from Washington is ABC News consultant Brad Garrett, a former FBI special agent. Brad, what is the investigation into this suspect going to focus on?
It's going to focus on 2 things primarily. Is this an act of terrorism? Is it a violation of civil rights like a hate crime? So they're going to look at his background. What groups does he belong to? What has he said online? Was his intention coming from Ohio to Virginia to actually harm people? So it's a big picture to look at, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to be very clear what his intention was and what he did.
Okay, now the clashes between the white nationalists and counter-protesters erupted Friday night. There were thousands of those white nationalists there and skirmishes for hours. Certainly authorities knew that this was a countercake. So with that intelligence in hand, should law enforcement have had more of a presence on the ground yesterday before things turned so violent?
The answer is yes. I mean, the key is the following. You have to keep protesters, counter-protesters separate, and you have to have an overwhelming show of force where they believe they can't do anything. The other thing is, in reality, you have to block the streets. You cannot allow cars to move where people are protesting. It takes a lot of folks. I just think the Charlottesville police were undermanned.
Got it. Do you think we're witnessing the rise of a new white nationalism in this country?
Well, unfortunately, I think there already is that. It's been on the increase. The Southern Poverty Law Center, I think, would tell you that the number of groups that fall into this category are increasing.
Okay. Our thanks again to you, Brad. Now, President Trump is facing criticism for how long it took him to respond to the violence in Charlottesville and for what he said when he finally did.
Yeah, what he didn't say. Much of the blowback is coming from his fellow Republicans, and ABC's David Wright is in Bedminster, New Jersey for us, where the president is this morning. David, good morning to you.
Good morning, Paula and Matt. One of the most important parts of the job for any president is, during times of crisis, to speak for the nation, giving voice to American values and projecting moral authority. And by that measure, many in the president's own party clearly felt that his response here missed the mark.
We're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia.
The president said the hate and division seen in Charlottesville have no place in America.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
But Trump declined to call out the white nationalists who organized this event or to call the car incident domestic terrorism. This morning, that comment denouncing bigotry on many sides is under fire, even from some of the president's Republican colleagues. Senator Ted Cruz put out his own statement calling the attack a grotesque act of domestic terrorism, posting that the Nazis, the KKK, and white supremacists are repulsive and evil, and all of us have a moral obligation to speak out. Senator John McCain tweeted, "White supremacists aren't patriots, they're traitors. America must unite against hatred and bigotry." And Senator Orrin Hatch also commented on Twitter, "We should call evil by its name. My brother didn't give his life fighting Hitler for Nazi ideas to go unchallenged here at home."
No matter our color, creed, religion, or political party, we are all Americans first.
Also under scrutiny, the time it took the president to respond. As these horrific scenes were unfolding, the first response from the White House came not from the president, but the First Lady. She tweeted, "Our country encourages freedom of speech, but let's communicate without hate in our hearts. No good comes from violence. #Charlottesville." It took her husband 40 minutes more to send out his first tweet. Reporters sought to press the president.
Mr. President, do you want the support of these white nationalist groups?
He ignored them. Well, later, the White House sought to clarify that troubling phrase, "on many sides," saying that the president was condemning hatred, bigotry, and violence from all sources and all sides. Matt and Paula?
A little ambiguous still there, David. Right. Thank you for your reporting from Bedminster. We want to bring in our chief anchor, George Stephanopoulos, who will be hosting this week a little bit later this morning. Good morning to you, George. First and foremost, so Trump is under a lot of fire from his own party for not denouncing this for what it is, as domestic terror and white supremacism. We saw those tweets from Ted Cruz saying the Nazis, KKK, and white supremacists are repulsive, or in Hatch calling this, said, "Let's call evil by its name." So how much pressure is he under right now to condemn these white nationalist hate groups?
This feels like a watershed moment for the Trump presidency, no question about it. Remember back in August 2005, Hurricane Katrina, George W. Bush, President Bush at that time, took a lot of fire for flying over Katrina, not appearing to be in touch with what was happening on the ground. I think that comment yesterday by the president, "on many sides," failing to call out clearly the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan members who instigated this violence is a major, major misstep. And that's why you see almost universal condemnation, even as you point out, by Republican senators in his own party, even those who've been pretty supportive of the president, like Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado, like Ted Cruz, who, even though he was an opponent of the president last year, now says we have to call this out as grotesque domestic terrorism. And he's been quite supportive of the president since he got in office.
So, George, there was a pretty big press conference, that's how President Trump called it, scheduled for Monday. Do you think that this is one of the things that he's going to talk about after a week at Bedminster?
That's not what's planned. What's planned is a press conference where the president's going to announce an investigation into whether there should be an investigation of Chinese trade practices. Clearly, this is going to be the question at the top of minds of reporters if the president does indeed do a press conference on Monday. Remember, yesterday, he ignored two questions that came at the end of that statement where he was asked to call, does he accept the support of white supremacists, why he does not call this domestic terrorism. He didn't want to answer those questions yesterday. If he has a press conference on Monday, he'll get them again.
Yes, he certainly will. And speaking of questions, you have an exclusive interview this morning with Anthony Scaramucci, who spent 11 days as the White House comms director.
All 11 days.
All of 11 days. It's his first interview.
That was, and I think one of the most interesting things to hear from Mr. Scaramucci this morning is what he would have recommended in the wake of this Charlottesville violence as communications director, whether he would have recommended the president give the kind of statement he gave yesterday.
Certainly looking forward to that interview. And again, his first interview since those 11 days as White House comms director.
Yes,
George, great having you. And don't miss George's exclusive interview, as we just mentioned, with Anthony Scaramucci, coming up a little bit later this morning on This Week, right here on ABC.
It's going to be fascinating. But now we turn to Rob Marciano, who has a lot to talk about the weather. Rob.
Hey, good morning, Matt. Over 100 damaging storm reports yesterday spread across the country. Here's some video fresh in from Washington, D.C., an area that's really been getting hit hard the past couple of weeks. Saturated ground there, this underpass being flooded, and folks stranded there. The police and fire departments had to scramble to get those motorists out. Also, in parts of Nebraska and Broken Bow, seeing over 5 inches of rainfall there, and that's saturated ground, too, with more storms coming across the Red River Valley. Flood watch is up just north of Dallas and southeast of Oklahoma City. These storms packing a punch, could see another 4 or 5 inches as they head into the Texarkana area along this stalled frontal boundary. The southern half of the front that passed through the northeast last night is stalling as it does so this time of year, and so more in the way of heavy rain. There's going to be some flooding there today, and also spread across parts of North Dakota and Minnesota as we go throughout the day today. Should be dry across the northeast and dry across the west, with the exception of the northwest. Finally, some rain across Seattle after a record-breaking dry streak there. That's going to help get some of the smoke out of the valleys, improving that air quality. That is a quick check on what's going on nationally weather-wise. Here now is your local forecast.
After last night's rain finally catching a break from the wet weather, mostly sunny skies through this afternoon. Nationals first pitch at 1:05. Expecting bright sunshine. Don't forget the sunblock and the shades. Those temperatures today making it into the low 80s. Overnight tonight, temperatures fall back into the 60s to low 70s under partly cloudy skies. And as we kick off the work week on Monday, we're back in the mid 80s under partly to mostly cloudy skies. A few isolated showers well off to our west.
Ongoing activity in the tropics. We'll talk about the potential threat for the U.S. in the next half hour, guys.
Great to have you again,
Nice
Rob.
to be here.
It's always good to have Ron as well. Let's check in with the headlines.
Thank you.
What did you call him yesterday?
The great. The great. Yes,
The
thank
great
you. Thank you.
Ron. The G-Man called you the great. It's great.
Yes, the G-Man.
The G-Man.
Good morning to you, Adrian and Robert. Good morning, everyone. We're going to begin in Toronto, Canada, where a Canadian pastor who was serving a life sentence of hard labor in North Korea has returned home a free man. Young Soo Lim was imprisoned for more than 2 years for his alleged anti-state activities in North Korea. The 62-year-old was released from what the North Korean government is calling sick bail, on sick bail. The release comes nearly 2 months after American college student Otto Warmbier was returned to the U.S. from North Korea in a coma. He died days later. In Mississippi, one of 4 prisoners who escaped from a county jail is back behind bars this morning. The 3 other escapees who got away Friday are still at large. Police say they're considered armed and dangerous. The men are suspected of crimes including rape, assault, and burglary. And overseas, in London, police have cleared the suspect arrested for allegedly pushing a woman to the ground in the path of an oncoming bus. The incident caught on security video. The bus barely missing that woman. Lawyers for an American man who they confirmed was questioned contended all along that he was not the man in that video. There were no winners in last night's Powerball drawing. The next drawing is Wednesday, when the jackpot is expected to reach $430 million. But we still don't know the identity of the person who hit the $393 million mega